Mix It with Mike. Plugin of the week comes from Soundevice Digital. It's the Verbum Entropic Hall. This is an amazing plugin. I just recently came across this and was really blown away by it. Its design is meant to be a vintage-style digital reverb. It adds a lot of analog character to it and coloration, including getting into some of the digital bit crunching kind of characteristics of old digital reverbs, and it really sounds amazing. The word entropic actually means to go from order to disorder or to chaos, and it plays a lot into what makes the reverb so interesting, that it is never kind of even. It has a lot of character to it and a lot of ways that you can color the sound with some of the different settings. Some that you see normal, like dampening, reverb time, high pass, low pass filters, and some that have more vintage kind of characteristics, like the color and legendarism control. So let's go over the graphic user interface and then call up some audio examples and not waste any time with me talking about it. So we have the top bar right here. Mostly what you have here is just a preset menu, so you can add your own presets. You can load existing presets if you're looking for a particular sound. Click on it, hit the load button, and it will load up the settings into the graphic display. Essentially what we have is the main section here. So you have a pre-delay. Now the pre-delay here operates for the whole plugin itself, right? So this will pre-delay everything because essentially most reverbs are divided up into two basic characteristics: early reflections, which would be the first reflections off the walls of a space, and then latter reflections, which would be the as all of that sort of morphs into a more dense reverberant field, would be the later reflections. So part of it is a timing thing. Part of it determines basically the size of the space. So you have a pre-delay that works there on both, and we'll get to some of these other settings in a second. The decay time, basically the reverb time, from 200 milliseconds up to 10 seconds. Wet dry control, so if you're using it in a send return configuration, you set it up to 100. High pass and low pass filter, right? So that's just basically rolling off low and high frequencies of the reverb. And over here we have a power button, which just turns it off or bypasses it. And we have a 12-bit thing. This is actually really cool because a lot of the old digital reverbs, I think the EMT-250, for example, was like an 8-bit digital reverb. And some of them are, they would have a certain characteristic grittiness or graininess. And sometimes that's really helpful, for getting a particular reverb sound, especially when you use it here in the advanced settings and making mono reverbs. It's particularly cool with guitars and stuff. Let's go over to the later reflection section, and we'll come back to some of the advanced controls. Over here, we have a size control. So this determines the size of the space that you're in. Interestingly, it doesn't affect the early reflections at all. It only affects the later reflections. But there's enough interesting character in them that you feel the openness and the depth. And then you have a wet dry, not a wet dry control, but an early reflection versus later reflection balance control there. So the size can operate. It will actually have a great impact on the decay time. So you can make things, you can create a lot of variation in the sound by the way that these two controls interact with each other. The pre-delay here is in addition to the pre-delay here. So this is the pre-delay specific for the latter reflections. And it goes from 0 milliseconds up to 200 milliseconds. So this will add on to it, where this will add pre-delay to the early reflections and the latter reflections. This will further separate the latter reflections. You have a damping control. So the damping control just means that the reverb time at frequencies above the cutoff point, wherever you set this here, will actually decay faster. And that's more of a natural kind of response, especially the bigger the space, the faster the high frequencies will decay. If you have a smaller or a really bright space, like with tiles and stuff like that, where the high frequency energy is very reflective, you can get something that's similar, but most of the time, in terms of reverb time across the frequency spectrum, but most of the time, the majority of the reverb time is in the low mids, and then as you go up to more mid-range, it decays faster, and then very fast as you go higher in frequency. This allows you to control that. You have a lush control. This is kind of an interesting one. It's described as a special left-right modulation softening of the reverb sound. So essentially, it's kind of smoothing out the reverb, and I'll show you some examples of how that works. There's a width control. This is really amazing because I love mono reverbs, and just the fact that you can go to mono and not just make it wider than stereo is really big. So I love that, and I'll show some examples about where that can be really cool. The color knob here is an analog saturation circuit emulation. So adding this in will bring in some different tonal characters, some different resonances into the sound, which will help you to kind of match up with different things, maybe with a vocal that needs a little warmth in it or something like that. The legendarism, this is kind of an interesting one. They're all interesting controls, but this one is kind of cool because it's a special process of simulation and color of the saturation of legendary reverbs. So this is what is described from the manual. And I think essentially what it means is that it's simulating the coloration of different vintage reverbs. So when you mix that in, again, these are just kind of tonal colorations. Here you can get warmth or brightness by adjusting the dampening. These two guys will give you different tonal characteristics. The lush will also add like a warming or an opening up characteristic. So in combination, all of these things together give you a lot of tonal variation, and you'll kind of see as we get to some of the audio examples. There's also a modulation section. So the modulation section will put a modulation on the reverb. You won't hear it necessarily with most settings as some kind of like chorus or phase or flange effect. It won't be that dramatic, but it does help to create some variation in the waves of decay, especially when you get to longer reverbs. All right, so I'm going to shut this down. And actually, couple quick things. One is that you can double click. If you double click on any knob, you can open up things like with the pre-delay, where you can set your pre-delays based on musical values, which is kind of cool, or just type in the numbers. So some of them are just numerical, right? If you just have a wet dry control, it's just going to give you a percentage control. Type OK. But they're mostly along those lines, so check that out. Also, if you right-click on any section, it will allow you to resize the graphic user interface. This is set to 150%, but you can zoom in 300%. Pretty dramatic, very big control. So that's kind of cool. You could save the screenshot, which is kind of cool for copying settings if you need to just send something to somebody quickly. And all of those things, otherwise, you're just connecting to the website, your activation, GPU acceleration. So if it's eating up a little bit too much CPU power, that can help save a little bit on that end. Otherwise, pretty much I found this to be very CPU friendly. But let's kind of go through a few things here. I just want to work with something that's simple. We'll just start with drums. I have two basic things here. I have a snare reverb, and I have like a drum room kind of reverb. So let's just listen to the drum room reverb, and then I'll kind of go through some of the settings and show you a little bit of what this is about. All right, here we go. Okay, so this is actually just pretty straightforward. I'm just going to scroll this over here for a sec. And I have kind of like a simple like room reverb kind of thing. I want to break down or isolate some of the component elements of it and show you how I can adjust it. So one thing I could do real quick, if I just wanted kind of give it a little mono grit, I could put a little 12-bit on there, switch it to mono, and you get something more like this. So you could hear the clarity that you get or the grit that you get by putting in the 12-bit. You could also bring in the width all the way around. So I'm going to just sweep that up wider just so you can get a sense how it really can put you, envelop you in a space. So you got a good wide range of control. A lot of people like to do, extra width on the reverbs. This is amazing for that. It's really cool. Now let's just put in a little bit of color. So I say I want to bring in a little bit more mid-range character with it, especially if I go to mono. Check this out. right? So you see how they can like bring out the body of the snare. Then there's the legendarism. Let's just check that out in terms of its coloration. Right, so you could bring in more vintage character in there. You can kind of leave it a little bit more open and natural, just to show you what the difference is between the early and the latter reflections. Right, so we have this now. If I adjust the size here, I just want you to notice the character difference that occurs from this. All right, so you get actual slapbacks going on later on. And now if I change the decay time, right, and then the reverb damping, so we can open up the sound, make it brighter. Or make it darker, because you can hear like everything just seems to sound really just musical. I guess is the best way to describe it. Like it just comes together so easy. We still have the high pass filter, so we could just so rich and open and powerful and flexible, and every setting seems to give you something that's usable. And it's just a matter of selecting what you want. There's so few reverbs that are just so simply fall into place like this. And maybe, I really love vintage reverbs, so I get into a lot of these different things, but this seems to give a lot of the characteristic things without the things that frustrate you about an AMS digital reverb, RMX 16 or something like that, or even like going back to the 480L or 224, yeah, just really powerful. So I'm going to set this back to normal here, open up the snare plate. It's not really a plate, but it's plate-like. So let's check this out. So if I mono it up a little bit here, I can get it to really hang in, onto that, get the right amount of pre-delay here. I have no early reflections, so I can kind of keep it more like this thing that just sort of opened up with no, kind of walls or space attached to it. If I want to make it brighter, I can make it brighter. just a load of flexibility here with just the ability to control like how much of the low end, how much body, how much of the top end, whether you dampen it so it sort of decays naturally, whether it cuts off and is more mid-rangey. I just love this thing. I don't know, maybe I haven't expressed that well enough here. Let's move on to like vocal sound. And I'll kind of put this. I also have a guitar solo here, so that may find its way in. Let's start with a vocal sound here. Go to the first verse and kind of open up something here, which is just like a short reverb. Just like a very short reverb with some width control on it. Let's see, it helps if I open up. There we go.
I died again. Please don't tell my friends, 'cause I don't want them to cry. No, not I. It's hard to witness with an intimate distance of friendship, toxic, codependent. I will quit it, never fix it. I will quit it, never fix it. Jesus' yeast gave me a priest infection. He wouldn't give me bread. I'm on funeral reception. I died again. Please don't tell my friends, 'cause I don't want them to cry. No, not I.
Just lifts this like watery kind of, reverb that kind of lifts the vocal out of the speakers, right? Especially with the modulation.
I died again. Please don't tell my friends, 'cause I don't want them to cry. No, not I.
Like, and almost like it's being doubled, but coming from all these different directions. This is something that I whipped up very quickly, where I kind of really super warmed up the top end, right? So you kind of feel it as a much more intimate experience. But if I open up the damping and the high frequency.
I died again. Please don't tell my friends, 'cause I don't want them to cry. No, not I. It's hard to witness with an intimate distance of friendship, turn toxic, codependent.
And then if you kind of mix this in or have like a long reverb, if you want to take like that approach, we also have this.
I died again. Please don't tell my friends, 'cause I don't want them to cry. No, not I. It's hard to witness with an intimate distance of friendship, turn toxic, codependent. I will quit it, never fix it. I will quit it, never fix it. Jesus' yeast gave me a priest infection. He wouldn't give me bread. I'm on funeral reception. I died again. Please don't tell my friends, 'cause I don't want them to cry. No, not I. It's hard to witness with an intimate distance of friendship, turn toxic, codependent. I will quit it, never fix it. I will quit it, never fix it. Jesus' yeast gave me a priest infection. He wouldn't give me bread. I'm on funeral reception. He asked if I was christened. I said yes, and did I mention I'm taking all my woes and hoes with me back to heaven.
Anyway, it's going to become sort of a mess here with all the other adjustments, but I think you can get a sense of like the flexibility and just how easy it is to kind of go in and dial in like 100 cool sounding reverbs, and then it's just a matter of figuring out which one works. The more I have kind of dug into this thing and the more I play around with it, the more I really love this thing as a vintage reverb that really a vintage sounding reverb that seems to take away a lot of the frustrating aspects of going back to some of the vintage reverbs that I know that have their limitations that have always been, kind of frustrating. This just gives you a lot more control in terms of the way, especially the way that you shape the tone and the coloration, and just playing around with it. And if you're just kind of getting used to it, or not understanding maybe all the settings, it might be worth just loading up some presets, kind of figure out something that more or less fits. It's like a good starting place. Uh, Load it up and then just kind of look at the settings, kind of see, make some adjustments, kind of move around with it a little bit, and I think you'll fall in love. This is a really great one. Very excited about it, and a great new release coming from United Plugins. That's the website that you'll find it on, and this is the Soundevice Digital as the company, and the name of the plugin is Verbum Entropic Hall. It is the plugin of the week.